Some years ago, I watched a documentary on television. I don't remember the name of the documentary, and I don't remember the name of the person who was featured in it. But I remember with stark clarity the feeling that I had as I watched it. It was a feeling of dread. The documentary was of a death row prisoner. They talked a bit about the heinous crime that he had committed, talked briefly about the trial through which he had passed, about the conviction which had been delivered, and about the years spent on the row. But the main part of the feature focused in on the last days and hours of this prisoner's life. As you might imagine, it had a great deal of emotion attached to it, especially when that final countdown began. As a part of that final countdown, he was given the opportunity to spend about an hour with his family. They were gathered there in a room. How could it be anything but superficial? Cameras there, guards present. And furthermore, there was the reality that if they somehow let the emotions out, they would never be able to get it all back together. The hour passed. Their goodbyes were excruciatingly hard. Time moved inexorably forward. His last meal, his final visit with the chaplain. And finally, now it seemed that the hands on the clock were moving more swiftly. He changed into his final clothes and then began the walk. Dead man walking, somebody said. That slow walk to a destiny with death. I just remember the feelings I had. The feeling of dread, of doom that engulfed me. It all came from one simple reality. The realization that the sands in the hourglass of his life were down to the final few grains. What do you do? What do you do when there's almost nothing left? It's not the only time I've watched the time run out in someone's life and experience. I watched it with a friend in his marriage. Anybody but somebody willfully blind would have known there was trouble. It wasn't a marriage made in paradise. In fact, it was a marriage whose origin, some said, was distinctly south of paradise. Trouble all the time. But somehow he still loved her, desperately wanted to hold on. I remember as it became increasingly evident there wasn't much left. I remember his question. Is there anything that can be done? Any possible way to still save it? The question simply was, what do you do with a marriage that is all but dead? I watched it with another friend and her job. It seemed quite clear that she and her manager were on a collision course, different priorities, different ways of getting things done, and my friend didn't have the power. I could see the handwriting on the wall. She tried to believe something different. But I remember those questions. What am I going to do? Where can I find another job? Somebody at my age, what possibilities are there? The question seemed clear to me. What do you do when there's really not a chance left? It's a question we ask many of us at some point in time in our lives. It may be asked by the student who has been dismissed from the academic program, what now? What about all of my dreams? There's nothing left. It's asked by the jilted lover whose fiancé has said, I'm sorry, it's over. And that person watches their dreams of married life go up in smoke. It's asked by the couple whose business has failed. Over and again, it gets asked. What do I do when it seems there's nothing left? It's a question asked, I believe, by a criminal. A criminal on a weekend 2,000 years ago. We don't know very much about him. Some call him a thief, others just a criminal. From the few pieces of his story that we can piece together from the four Gospels and whatever else we might find to read about him, we assume, probably correctly, that he got caught up in the wrong crowd, a zealot type of crowd, a crowd that was going to do something about the Romans, do something about their occupation of our land. He got caught, probably, with a certain insurrectionist named Barabbas. Not only got caught up with him, but got caught with him. After the insurrection, after blood had been shed, they apprehended them. The Romans were unmerciful. They knew exactly what to do with these type of people. Their justice was swift and it was severe. Crosses were prepared. The place of execution was identified. The hour was defined and the countdown began. We join the story in progress. In fact, so in progress that they're already on their way to that place called Calvary. Luke tells us the story, Luke chapter 23. But before we read his words, I want to ask you to watch for something as we read. There's a statement, 2 words long, a variation of which Luke makes 3 times. It's made by the religious leaders. It's made by the Roman soldiers. It's made even by the other criminal hanging on the other cross. Each time the focus is Jesus. Each time the statement could be summarized with 2 words, save yourself. Take note of those words, Luke 23. I begin reading in verse 32. 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him there along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, he saved others. Let him save himself if he is God's Messiah, the chosen one. The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, if you're the king of the Jews, save yourself. There was a written notice above him which read, this is the king of the Jews. One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us. But the other criminal rebuked him. Don't you fear God, he said, since you are under the same sentence. We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus answered, truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. Save yourself. Save yourself. Save yourself and us. Don't misunderstand. It's not an invitation, it's derision. It's not a way out, it's mockery. They tell him to save himself precisely because they believe he cannot save himself. They don't believe for one moment he is who he claims to be. So as they stand there telling him to save himself, they know there's no way he will save himself. The first criminal joins in their derisive remarks. Each one of those who call out has passed judgment. They have rendered their verdict. This man is no one but a charlatan. He's not the Christ, he's a quack. He's not the Savior, he's a sham. They've rendered their verdict. But there is one more to speak. One more who has not yet rendered his verdict. Somehow in his mind, despite all the suffering, all the agony and pain, he must have come to the realization that he was at the crossroads of destiny. That at this moment in time, he had a choice to make. He had a verdict to render. Now, I can understand if you say he's just hedging his bets. That's all he's doing, taking a chance. After all, what does he have to lose? He has almost nothing left. What does he have to lose? You can hardly blame him if that's what he's doing. You know the person to whom the doctors have said, there's nothing more we can do. Chemo has not been effective. The treatment that we tried and we thought might be, that we got approval for, that didn't have its result. The trip to Tijuana doesn't pay off. How can you blame somebody in that position? Finally throwing it all on God, repenting, give it to Him. It's worth a shot. You're hedging your bets. Who can blame you? You have to think. You have to wonder, is that this man? He must realize at some level, he must understand to some degree that there is a possibility. He must have witnessed him saying, Father, forgive them. He heard them talking about him being the Messiah. Could it be? That moment is pregnant with destiny. I find the way Max Lucado paints this pivotal nature of the cross to be compelling. Lucado writes, the cross rests on the timeline of history like a compelling diamond. Its tragedy summons all sufferers. Its absurdity attracts all cynics. Its hope lures all searchers. History has idolized and despised it, gold-plated and burned it, worn and trashed it. History has done everything but ignore it. How could you ignore such a piece of lumber? Suspended on its beams is the greatest claim in history, a crucified carpenter claiming to be God on earth, divine, eternal, the death slayer. Never has timber been regarded so sacred. No wonder the Apostle Paul called the cross event the core of the gospel, its bottom line sobering. If the account is true, it is history's hinge, period. If not, the cross is history's hoax. Which is the cross for you, hinge or hoax? Or in the words of Jesus, who do you say that I am? There's no way the criminal, the thief, could have understood all of that. But he understood enough to try in between the lunges of trying to gasp for just a bit more oxygen. He must have understood enough to turn his head toward the man in the middle, the man on the center cross. He must have understood enough to gasp out, to croak out the words that become his verdict. Jesus, remember me. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. When you wear a crown instead of thorns, don't forget that I hung by your side. Don't forget that I longed for your touch. Don't forget that I asked for your peace. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. he has nothing left. A few hours, a day or two at best, and those will be filled with almost unspeakable suffering. And yet he turns to Jesus. In my hand, no price I bring. Simply to thy cross I cling. Nothing left. Just like somebody who came in this evening. There's nothing left in that marriage. Just a husk. The kernel is gone. The heart has died. Nothing left in your life. Hanging on by a thread. A job, you don't know where the next paycheck will come from. Somebody came in this evening struggling against some inner darkness. It feels there's nothing left. What do you have to offer? And the question arises in your mind. It's piercing, it's penetrating, and it's painful. What do you do when there's nothing left? Well, the criminal answers. You render a verdict on the man hanging from the center cross. And your verdict sounds like a plea. Jesus, remember me. Remember me. We Adventists have sometimes struggled with his answer. We've talked about commas and we've talked about the state of human beings after death. We've talked about the fact that on resurrection morn, when Mary goes to cling to Jesus, he says, "Don't detain me. I have not yet ascended to my Father." We've talked about that because of his statement. Today is a central word. We've tried to explain it theologically. But could I suggest pointing your vision in another direction? Today was that day. That day that today we call Good Friday. Today was for them. All those who had followed Jesus, those disciples who had first huddled around him and then fled from him. Today was a day of abject, total, and complete disaster. Today was the day that would define the end of their dreams, the end of their hopes. Today was the day that would define the end of the road for the fact that God had come to redeem Israel. Today was a day of disaster and tragedy. That's today. Today is a day when all we see of disciples are elbows and heels as they disappear in the direction of safety. Today is the day when no one dares claim him as Christ, except for one. One who had nothing left. One who said, "Remember me." You can hear the response. The words of Jesus must have come not only as assurance to this man, but as a promise to his own soul. As he turns to him and says, Today you call me a king? Today, of all days? Not the day when I stood in front of the tomb of Lazarus and said, "I am the resurrection and the life." They proclaimed me king then. Not the day when the tempest stilled and fell to its knees at the word of my mouth. They proclaimed me Messiah then. Not the day when I fed the multitudes and they believed that finally God had moved in with his people. They proclaimed me the life giver then, but not today. Today they've all run, abandoned me, left me, except for you. Well, let me tell you, my friend, if you can hang in the midst of crosses and still believe in hope, if you can hang in the midst of death and still believe in life, if you can hang with a crucified criminal and still believe in a kingdom, then you have my word on this day, today, a day of apparent tragedy, that a kingdom is coming. And you will be in it. Today, the day when nothing is left, and yet hope is born. That's today. That's tonight. For you who came in, hanging on by a thread, all you need to do is say, Jesus, remember me. Remember me. And he'll say, tonight, I give you my word. Tonight, I give you my oath. Tonight, I give you my promise that nothing will take you out of my nail-scarred hand. That's his word to you.